And like my spill before, I say if you could take a break from your digital during Saturday and Sunday, it might do you some good, but I don't know. I've been trying to do it. I think as far as like a break, I try not to make any content for the internet videos and stuff like that. But today is Proverbs 24. Today's actually October 23rd, but the weekend is the 24 and 25. So I thought to myself, hey, why don't I maybe, do two. I'm going to try to do three and upload all three today. Proverbs 24. Do not envy the wicked. Do not desire their company, for their hearts plot violence, and their lips talk about making evil, making trouble. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. The wise prevail through great power, and those who have knowledge muster their strength. Surely you need guidance to wage war, and victory is won through many advisors. Wisdom is too high for fools. In the assembly at the gate they must not open their mouths. Whoever plots evil will be known as a schemer. The schemes of folly are sin, and people detest a mocker. If you falter in a time of trouble, how small is your strength? Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, but we knew nothing about this, does not he who weighs the hearts perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done? Eat honey, my son, for it is good. Honey from the comb is sweet to your taste. Know also that wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there is a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. Do not lurk like a thief near the house of the righteous. Do not plunder their dwelling place. For though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again, but the wicked stumble and calamity strikes. Do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from them. Got interrupted. Okay, we're on Proverbs 24:17. Do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice. Of the Lord will see and disapprove and turn his wrath away from them. Do not fret because of evildoers, or be envious of the wicked, for the evildoer has no future hope, and the lamp of the wicked will be snuffed out. Fear the Lord and the King, my son, and do not join with the rebellious officials, for those too will send sudden destruction on them, and who knows that calamities they can bring. These are sayings of the wise. To show partiality in judging is not good. Whoever says to the guilty, you are innocent, will be cursed by peoples and denounced by nations. Proverbs 24:25. but it will go well with those who convict the guilty, and rich blessings will come on them. And honest answers is like a kiss on the lips. Put your outdoor work in order and get your fields ready after that. Build your house. Do not testify against your neighbor without cause. Would you use your lips to mislead? Do not say, I'll do to them as they have done to me. I'll pay them back for what they did.
Proverbs 24 begins with, I went by, in verse 30. It's a bigger chapter. I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding, and there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles, its stone wall was broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, so shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Now, last week, we looked in general what Proverbs were, basically very short statements to convey great spiritual truths. And it's the best way to get started when we're training our children, or even us as Christians. It's a good place for us to start is in the Proverbs, because there we have very short sentences. We have contrast between good and evil, the righteous and the unrighteous, those who fear God and those who do not fear God. We have truth and error that's being portrayed. And we saw last week that the writer was Solomon. In fact, he wrote probably the first 29 chapters, and the last 2 were written by Agur and Lemuel. And that was our general look at the Proverbs. But we did also make the point that the Proverbs deals a lot more than just with the issues of life, but also deals with the judgment to come. And we saw many Proverbs that dealt with the very fact that God sits in judgment and views all for himself. And he's made all things for himself. Yes, even the wicked for the day of judgment. So it's a very serious and sober book as well. Whenever you consider the Word of God, we're dealing with men's souls. So it is a very serious thing. Then we saw 5 things from the verses that we saw, and because of the fact we have 5 verses, it worked out pretty well in terms of our consideration. And the first thing that we noticed in verse 30 was that Solomon, a king, had heard of a man's reputation of being lazy as well as being devoid of understanding. You notice that he says he went by the field of the lazy man. Notice he's already made a judgment of this man being lazy before he sees it. Well, he really didn't make a judgment before he saw it. What he did is he heard of the reputation of this man. Many had come and told him about this man, so he went to see it. And so we went to investigate a report about a lazy man. And this is backed up in verse 31, and he says, and there it was. He heard this report of this man being lazy, being void of any understanding. Verse 31, he says, and there it was. It was true. The report is true, and it was all broken down. The wall's broken down. There's nettles, there's weeds, there's thorns. The report is true. And that was the second thing we saw, was that this horrible reputation of this man was true. Thirdly, we saw Solomon's meditation in verse 32. He saw it, and he considered it well. He thought about it quite a bit. He asked questions. How could this man have gotten into this particular position? He considered it well, but then he didn't stop there. The third thing he did is that he looked on it again to see if he missed anything, any instruction that he might receive. And that was the fourth thing that he did, is that he received instruction from it. And that was Solomon's meditation. That was the third thing that we looked at last week. Now, between verses 32 and 33, it would appear that Solomon had an interaction with this man and could very well have told him that this was already taught earlier to this man in Proverbs chapter 6, that you are to be one who works the land. Your land has been given to you. You should work it. Or he could have used the example of Adam, telling him that Adam, before he fell, before he sinned, he had work to do. He was to tend the garden and he was to keep it. And so he could have used that. We just don't know. But it appears that Solomon went there for a reason, to consider it and to talk to the man. And then fourthly, we saw in verse 33 the man's response. And he minimizes his sin of laziness and just calls it just a little sleep, just a little slumber. just a little folding of the hands. What is the big deal? It's just a little sleep. And so we see here that this man was full of excuses, minimized his sin. In essence, he lied. It was a lot more than just a little sleep and a little slumber. He was doing a lot of sleep, a lot of slumbering, a lot of folding of the hands. His hands were not doing any work whatsoever. And then the sad thing was in the end result, was in verse 34. Solomon pronounces a woe upon this man. He tells him that his poverty and his need was going to come violently upon this man. We had 3 points of application last week. We looked at the obvious, because the first question I did ask after we looked at these 5 verses is God only concerned with vineyards and fields and broken down walls? Well, no, there's a lot more to this text than just the obvious, but we couldn't go by the obvious, and we looked at 3 things in regards to those things that were obvious. And first of all, in our application last week, we saw that the opposite of laziness was to be diligent in our work. Whatever calling God has given to us, we should be diligent in that call. God has given us the 4th commandment. It was read today, that 6 days you shall do all your labor, and the 7th is a Sabbath rest. Not rest 7 days, but you are to do your work those other days. And so whatever sphere we find ourselves in, we should work hard